Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the day, where I am going to talk about migrating your web apps to ASP.NET Core one page at a time. And this technique works for any kind of web app. You can do it with ASP.NET WebForms, ASP.NET MVC, theoretically, classic ASP, if you have a classic ASP application. What else? Rails, Django, pretty much anything, but mainly web forms, because reasons. I'm Mark Rendle, and I have been working with .NET since the first .NET, actually since the first .NET beta. I downloaded the first ever beta of .NET 1.0 and then wrote a C# program to run reflection over the entire base class library and give me all the classes and methods and everything. And I've been really excited about all the new .NET stuff. I was there with when it was called Project K, and I actually put something into production with Project K way back in the day in a Docker container, and it was a micro service that generated a GUID. You hit an endpoint and it generated a GUID and it gave it back to you. And the only reason it existed was because almost everything was written in Node, and Node is terribly slow at generating GUIDs, and it locks while it's doing it. Mick, mate, could you mute yourself, please? Or can I mute you? There we go. Thanks very much. Unless you were kind of going, Node is very fast at generating GUIDs, in which case, no, it isn't, you're wrong. But yes, so I pulled GUID generation out into a microservice so that Node didn't have to work so hard and could keep tracking people's movements over some web pages. But yes, and now we're on to .NET 5.0, and now Microsoft have essentially gone all in and said, we are this is now .NET. The old .NET is the old .NET, and this is new .NET going forwards, and everything else. And so they haven't brought over various things. And one of the things they haven't brought over is web forms. And a bunch of people are obviously quite upset about this. People have got big, complicated applications written in ASP.NET web forms, and we're talking like hundreds of thousands or millions of lines of code. Around the world, there are probably billions of lines of code all wrapped up in ASP.NET web forms. And Microsoft is not bringing it over, and I think that's a good thing. And the reason I think that is a good thing is because I have worked with a lot of ASP.NET web forms applications over the years. And after 20 years, when you've got an application that started in .NET 1.0 or .NET 2.0 and has been maintained for the past 20 years by a succession of different people, trying to maintain an ASP.NET web forms application in 2021 is a dumpster fire. Yes, it is. You might be saying, not all web forms applications. You can write clean web forms code, and you can use proper programming practices and dependency injection and all this sort of stuff. Not all web forms applications are bad. To which I reply, I have seen things you people wouldn't believe. I firmly believe that in this day and age, the worst C# code still in production exists entirely inside web forms applications. I am not going to show any examples because they all come from real places, but recently I found a method in an ASP.NET web forms application where they were trying to correct common spelling mistakes. If you spelled document wrong, they would try and correct it. And so they had a huge if statement that contained all the possible misspellings of the word document. And I mean, there were like 300 and something or pipes in this if statement. And on every single one of those or statements, they called .trim on the variable that contained the document name. So they created 300 strings in the process of running this if statement. And that's just one example. You know, it's like a whole daily WTF, and it's all inside WebForms code. So why would you want to move? I mean, let's assume that you are one of the people who go, oh, not all web forms. And actually, yes, you've got a really, really nice web forms application, and it's a joy to maintain, and you absolutely love it, and you wouldn't trade it for anything at all. Why would you want to move to ASP.NET Core? Well, a variety of reasons. First, it runs on Linux. Now, that might not sound like a particular reason to switch over, but consider that the hosting costs for Linux tend to be less than the hosting costs for Windows servers, especially in a cloud environment. Also, the fact that it runs on Linux means that it runs in containers, which means you can use Docker and Kubernetes or Azure Container Services, or the DigitalOcean droplets, where you just go, here's my image, run me that as a Docker container. And all that good stuff. And then you can also get into service meshes and all kinds of bonkers things that make Kubernetes so much fun. Also, ASP.NET Core is stupid fast, and I mean it is really stupid fast. There's a great little anecdote from way back at NDC, I think NDC Oslo, a few years ago, where Damien Edwards and David Fowler did a talk on ASP.NET Core and how they were working on making the performance better. And it was a deep dive into some of the things, like, did you know, for example, that when ASP.NET Core checks the HTTP verb, get, put, post, delete, that sort of thing, it actually converts the UTF-8 bytes into a 64-bit integer and then just maps against those. To do a really quick lookup of what verb it is, which is much better than what Node used to do when it wanted to check, where it just checked the first letter of the method instead. And so patch, put, and post were all treated as the same thing. Brilliant. But yes, anyway, they were trying to make it fast. And when they first came out with the Kestrel HTTP server, Kelly Summers, I think her name is, on Linux, was building her own HTTP server in C, and she benchmarked it, and she benchmarked Kestrel, and her server could do like 1 million requests a second, and Kestrel on the same hardware could do 70,000 requests a second. And so she was kind of making fun of Kestrel. And apparently Damien went into the room where the developers on Kestrel were working and went, why do we only do 70,000 requests a second? This is ridiculous. And they said, you didn't say you wanted it to be fast. And so he went, yes, make it fast, please. That would be really good. And so they went off and they did. And now it's up near the top of the benchmarks on the Tech Empower benchmarks for the plain text. So the Kestrel server itself is fast. And there's a huge amount of effort still going into things like making database access fast and making JSON serialization fast so that it can climb further up the benchmarks on things like fortunes and database updates and so forth. But the number one reason why you want to move to ASP.NET Core from ASP.NET is that ASP.NET Core is being actively developed. People are working on it. It is having features added. It is supported by Microsoft. It's also open source, so if you run into a problem and you know how to fix it, you can fix it and send them a pull request, and so that's good too. But the fact is that ASP.NET Core is getting all the attention and love, and ASP.NET Web Forms is getting none. And this is a problem because Web Forms is not supported in .NET Core or 5.0, because it would be really, really, really difficult to migrate all of Web Forms across. Quite a lot of what happens inside Web Forms is actually Windows components. And so making it cross-platform, they'd have to rewrite a bunch of stuff as .NET components, and they don't want to do that. So you can't just bring your Web Forms over to .NET Core and then start migrating it to MVC or whatever you want to do. But also, ASP.NET Core doesn't run on .NET 4. It used to. The first version of ASP.NET Core did run on .NET 4.6 and higher, I believe. But as they started adding more things for performance and everything else to .NET Core, like span and memory and buffers and all sorts of things where they were actually changing the runtime to make these things work, And they were using these features. A lot of these features were driven by ASP.NET Core. And so they had to make the decision, say ASP.NET Core is going to only run on .NET Core and now .NET 5. And so there's no sort of a bit at a time path, really, to go from ASP.NET WebForms or ASP.NET MVC to ASP.NET Core. And when you've got a million lines of code in an application, that's a big problem, because you can't just go, we're not adding any new features and we're not doing any support and we're not making any changes to this existing application until we have rewritten the whole thing in ASP.NET Core. We don't know ASP.NET Core. We've never used Razor. We don't know MVC. We don't understand the pattern. We're going to have to stop. We're going to have to learn that. And then we're going to have to migrate a million lines of code. So come back in 3 years and we'll add your feature then. Not an option. What you want is a way to do it a page at a time, a little bit at a time. Now, I know of one solution to this, and that is a framework that is quite a lot like WebForms. It looks a lot like WebForms. Its syntax, its ASPX style pages are a lot like WebForms, but it's not WebForms. It's a new open source framework that is completely different. And this one does run on both .NET 4 and .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5. And so you can add this into your Visual Studio. There's a Visual Studio extension. And then you open your WebForms project and you add .vvm to it, and then you just start migrating pages, and you can do quite a lot of copying and pasting into the new thing. And so that actually works. Apparently, I don't really know exactly how it works, and I don't know what the support situation is, and you're kind of signing up for this new framework to build your web application on, and it's not from Microsoft, and so you don't know whether it's going to be supported, and I don't know if they charge for it and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, it's a possibility, but it's not a particularly it's not the obvious solution. It's not a kind of, yeah, let's do that, what could possibly go wrong? And then I was just reading through my daily dose of RSS feed newsletter things, and I saw a blog post from somebody who's working on something, and I happen to be working on a WebForms application at the moment and not enjoying it, and those two things came together in my head, and I went, hang on a minute, I've got a great idea. I didn't go, hang on a minute, lads, because of the code of conduct. I went, hang on a minute, I've got a great idea. And if you haven't seen The Italian Job, you don't know what I'm talking about, and you should watch The Italian Job. Like, just stop watching me and go and watch The Italian Job now, trust me. It's much better than listening to me waffle on, I promise you. Okay. If you people at home there, I've got a whole sort of screen here dedicated to showing people who are in the room at the moment. And if you can turn on your webcam, it would be really appreciated. It's really nice to be able to see people's faces and little Lego engineers that they've got in front of the webcam and stuff like that. Yay, Tom. It's also really weird being able to see everybody's name. When you're doing a talk at NDC, you've just got an audience, you see their faces, and yet you might know sort of people and go, hey, but yeah, when you can actually see people's names and you sort of go, oh, I used to work with you at Morgan Stanley. I didn't know you were here. That's awesome. So yes, you know who you are. So yeah, I had a great idea. I thought, what about if, because the thing that I found in my RSS feeds was about something called YARP. And YARP stands for Yet Another Reverse Proxy. And it's a Microsoft project to build a reverse proxy using Kestrel. So you have a customizable, codable reverse proxy using Kestrel. And so I thought, and it just sits in basically an ASP.NET Core application. And so I thought, well, what if I made an ASP.NET Core application that had MVC or Razor Pages or Blazor or whatever in it, and it also had this reverse proxy in there And so if it got asked for a page it didn't know about, it would just proxy it on. And then if I point the proxy at the WebForms application, then it will just serve the WebForms application completely normally. But if I then add a page to the MVC application, which matches the path that's being looked for, then it'll serve it from ASP.NET Core. And then I could literally replace one page at a time. So the thing that I was thinking of using, YARP, yet another reverse proxy, supports .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5.0, and it's currently in preview. It's open source, it's on GitHub, Microsoft/reverse proxy, it's on NuGet, and we're on preview versions of it at the moment, but I'm expecting it to be sort of stable, and it certainly seems to work okay. And so this is a great idea. I've had a fantastic idea. I have invented this. I am a genius. And then I found out that this is actually an established pattern for doing this sort of thing, coined by Martin Fowler in 2004. It's called the strangler fig pattern. It was originally called the strangler pattern, has the same sort of origin, and then people pointed out that's a really nasty word. Why would you call something that? Please change it. And so he changed it to strangler fig. And it comes from a whole breed of plants called strangler figs or banyan trees. And these things actually germinate, they germinate in other trees, and then they grow and they roots and they go down and down until they take root. And then they basically kill the tree that they have that they've grown on and taken the nutrients from and all this sort of stuff. And so you end up with this new tree that's bigger than the old tree and fresher and all this sort of stuff, and the old tree just dies. And I thought that's a really good analogy for what I'm doing. And so I started messing about with this, and I also started streaming, and I thought this is a good opportunity. I'm going to go on Twitch and people can just watch me and laugh at me as I try and build this thing. And I'm still doing it, and I'm still building it on Twitch. And so you can go there and watch me Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 PM UK time. Yes, that was a massive plug. No, I don't care. Shut up. So let's do a quick demo. I went on to Twitter and I said, what are the sample applications for ASP.NET WebForms? And somebody pointed me at this, the Wingtip Toys application. This is Wingtip Toys. You can tell it's WebForms. There you go. So, yeah. And we've got cars and planes and trucks and boats and rockets and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try and stick an ASP.NET MVC application in front of that. And so I'm going to show you roughly how this went. So I've got my solution here, and I'm in .NET 5.0. And I'm going to say .NET new MVC -o src /demo. .NET sln add src /demo, and then we can rider and open this up in here. So here is my completely empty boilerplate ASP.NET MVC application, which has got all this stuff in it. Okay, so to this I am going to add a NuGet package, and I'm going to have pre-release turned on and search for Microsoft.reverse proxy. And there it is, so 1.0 preview 8.21065.1. Let's add that in here. And then you need to add some configuration to this. I'm just going to open this one up, which is my sort of crib sheet. So we go into app settings.development.json, and we're going to add in this configuration here. So this basically says create a route, route 1, cluster 1, catch all, define a cluster, and we're going to get this to point at localhost 24019, which is our back-end application. And then in startup, I'm just going to say endpoints dot map reverse proxy. I'm going to leave that like that. And I think that is basically all of it. Oh no, we need services. So we can do services dot add reverse proxy dot load from config configuration dot get section reverse proxy, like so. So now I've got my Wingtip Toys application running. Now I'm going to run my ASP.NET Core application. And it's going to boot up like this. I'm going to go to here. I'm going to go to HTTPS localhost 5001. And there you go. That is my ASP.NET Core application, which is pretending to be my Wingtip Toys application. Except it's a little bit weird because I would expect this to have caught the index page, because I know my ASP.NET Core application has an index page. So why isn't it able to see it? So a little bit of experimentation with this, and it turned out that to get it to work properly, you have to put explicit routes on every single endpoint in your ASP.NET Core application. So if I now do this, and go back to here and do refresh, you see I get my default page from my ASP.NET Core application. So that's what we wanted there. So now I need to figure out how to make my ASP.NET Core application look like my, so I need this sort of bootstrap bar up at the top here. Now, if I were doing this properly, if I were doing this in a real situation, I would probably go to the trouble of trying to create a new Bootstrap theme using Bootstrap 5 that matched the old Bootstrap theme. But this is quick and dirty, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to go into Wingtip Toys, and I'm going to actually, you know what, this is going to take too long. I'm going to stop trying to write this on the fly, and I am instead terminate that process, and I'm just going to jump into my project that I'm using for testing my thing at the moment, and I'm going to run this. And this is now going to show up in here. So, in the immortal words of Blue Peter presenters, here's what I prepared earlier. Something went ring at me. So yes, this is an actual ASP.NET Core application. This is coming from the front end, the proxy application, and you can tell because if I go to About, you can see it says Wingtip Toys, and down here it says, so this is the old thing which has Wingtip Toys in the title bar, and this is the new thing which has Wingtip Toys 2 and also has this admin link here. And all I basically did for this was I copied the stuff out of the site master on the old website, and you can actually see where I did it here. I've brought some old ASP things across, and I turned it into a new MVC, sort of turned it in, put it into the layout page and copied the bootstrap files across, and all this sort of stuff. And it essentially, it worked, except with a couple of downsides, which is what I want to talk about for the rest of this talk. Because what's going on in an application is not just Tracy Island. I know. The thing is, I was too old for Tracy Island. Somebody asked about Tracy Island in the chat, and if you are a millennial or a Zoomer, you will not know what we're talking about. But Blue Peter, which was a children's program back in the day, there was a toy released for Christmas called Tracy Island from the Thunderbirds show, and everybody wanted the toy, and it sold out everywhere, and people were like completely cut up about it. And Blue Peter, which showed you how to make things, showed you over the course of about a month how to make your own Tracy Island, and it was epic. It was huge, and so everybody of my generation still remembers Blue Peter and Tracy Island. Nice thing about doing conferences at home is you can drink tea, which you've made yourself. So yes, integration. There are things that are going on the server side that you need to be able to communicate between these two services. And the first one of these is session. So WebForms applications, certainly most of the ones I work on, make an awful lot of use of session. And you know, I see WebForms applications where they don't know about query parameters, and so the way that they pass query parameters from one page to another is that they put them into session and then they redirect to the other page, and then they pull them out of session again. Quite a lot of WebForms applications actually use in-process session, because they want to stick objects in there. They've got lovely objects which they've defined, which are millions of miles deep and probably multiple megabytes on the heap, and have self-references circling all over the place that you just have no hope of serializing, which means you can't use out-of-process session because there's no way of getting the object from there to there. So they use in-process session, and they use sticky load balancing to make sure that people always get directed to the same server. Or, in some cases, they just run one server. Yes, they really do. And so we need a way for the ASP.NET Core app to be able to go to the WebForms app and say, hey, I need a value that you keep in session, or you know, that value you keep in session, you need to change it. And so we need an API that goes from the ASP.NET Core app to the WebForms app. And so the first thing I did in my sort of adventures in coding that I was doing on Twitch was I wrote a session sharer, and it eventually made its way into a library, which I will tell you more about later on. But in this application here, actually, let's go to Wingtip Toys first of all. So in this application here, we are using this package, and we have a session API handler. So the easiest way to put endpoints into a WebForms application, if you are just really set against using WebForms or creating ASMX pages or whatever, however people used to do services in WebForms, you just create an HTTP handler and plug it into the pipeline, and then you can distribute that in a NuGet package, which is really nice. And so we create this API handler that gets the HTTP context in, and it just goes, do I have this value in session? And if I don't, then, or if you haven't specified a key, then we'll just return 400. And if I can't find it in session, then I'm just going to return 404. Otherwise, we'll serialize it to bytes and we'll pass it back across the line. I remember what I said before about objects that you can't serialize. People are going to have to fix that. There's not a lot I can do about it. But for the most part, we sort of go, if it's a string, then just do encoding.getBytes. If it's one of these things, we can use bitconverter.getBytes. Decimals and dates and times are a bit more complicated. But for those objects that people are just going, I just want to stick this in session and have it there, I thought about using binary converter, and then I looked, and Microsoft have binary converter exists in .NET Core. I think they put it in .NET Core 2.0 or 2.1, and there was much rejoicing because people wanted to use it. But now they're kind of backing away from it and going, we really, really hate binary converter. There are all sorts of security issues with it. Barry Dorrans gets very, very upset. And so we're kind of deprecating it. We're not promising to support it for any length of time. And so I thought, and then what I actually use when I want to serialize things to bytes and pass them across things very quickly is MessagePack. MessagePack is a lovely binary serialization format. It's a bit like Protobuf, but it's much easier to integrate into a .NET application because there's a brilliant MessagePack library that does it for you. And it will serialize objects that it doesn't recognize. You don't have to have a decorated object. And so I've just gone, hey, let's just use MessagePack. So anything that we don't know how to deal with, we'll just use MessagePack and serialize that back across the wire. And then on the facade side, we just have a Cocoon session. And this, we register with dependency injection. Not in here, though. And then in here, we can just say, hey, we've got a cache. We'll keep a local cache of the session so that we only have to get each value once. But we'll do this get async. Otherwise, we will talk to the web app at the back end, and we will go and get that session value out of there. And so in this particular application, I just go to here, and if I go to Rocket, so this page is being served from the WebForms application, and I do add to cart, and that takes me to the cart page here. And now the cart is actually in a SQL database that's being used by the back-end application. But when I go to my home page here, the key for that cart is stored in session. And so just to make this cart brackets one thing work in my ASP.NET Core MVC application, it had to talk to the backend application and say, what's the cart ID for the current session? Get that back, and then I've just created a link to the database, and I am recreating what was entity framework in the WebForms application, and I'm basically just copying the entity classes across. So I've got cart item and category and product, but I've created a standard entity framework core 5.0 context, just created these DB sets for those classes, and it just worked. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to change anything on the classes here. I just left everything as it was. I could even link to those classes rather than import them in, but I thought, no, I don't want to do that. So yes, and then I created a tag helper. So in Wingtip Toys, in site.master, that cart link is done. We've got this cart count here. I have no idea where that gets set from, but let's do a Control-Shift-F. Cart count. There we go. We've got a pre-render, and that creates a new shopping cart actions and gets the cart count and then renders that in there. So of course it does, because this is ASP.NET WebForms. So yes, that's how that does that. Whereas I have a cart link tag helper that basically says, in my layout code here, I can just have a cart link. See, Razor, ASP.NET Core, Razor MVC, tag helpers are epic. So this cart link is a tag helper that gets turned into an href equals and has the amount of things you've got in your cart added to it. And all this is done. So we have the shopping cart there, and the shopping cart is another thing that gets pulled in, and you can see we've got Cocoon session gets pulled in here and DB context gets pulled in here, and that drags that across and then returns the count back out. Considering it's having to do all that, it actually loads really quickly. I'm quite impressed. So that was authentication. That was session, rather. So the next thing is authentication, because logging in to the site at the back, you want that person to be logged in with the same identifier on the site on the front. And so that was challenging. And so for that, I had to write another section to this set of libraries. And we have an auth API handler. And this one it gets the HTTP context and says, if it's a claims principal, then if it's not authenticated, we'll just return 401 to say it's not authenticated. Otherwise, we're going to serialize a claims principal. Has anyone ever tried serializing a claims principal in .NET 4? Shout out in the chat and tell people why it doesn't work. Circular references, fundamentally. There are many, many circular references in a claims principal. But I was not deterred. I will not be stopped from doing crazy things just because .NET doesn't want to play with me. So turning back to message pack again, and this time I have control. I know what the object I want to serialize is. I know it won't serialize, so I can actually create proper message pack objects with a list of identities, and I can convert between a claims principal and a message pack version of claims principal, and I can serialize that back across as well. And I can remember to call context.response.flush and context.response.end every single time. Otherwise, I lose 2 hours just going around in circles trying to find out why things aren't working. And then on the facade side, this is different from session. This is not just I need a value from the back end. This is actually a key part of the whole web application experience. And so I need to get this integrated properly. And so I had to create my own authentication handler for ASP.NET Core. And so we have a Cocoon authentication handler here, which derives from authentication handler, which is built into ASP.NET Core. So this is authentication handler is the same place that cookie authentication handler and basic authentication handler, all of those derive from this. So actually quite a lot of the work is already done for you. And so we have we have to override handle authenticate async, and we have to override handle challenge async. And this uses configuration to say where it's going to send you to if there's a login URL, and set the return URL and all this sort of stuff. But this authenticate async has an HTTP client injected into it, and it goes off and it passes over. The key thing with all of this is we have to pass over the cookies, and we pass over all the cookies because session comes from a cookie. And I know what it's called, but I worry that you can change it and people might have changed it. So I just send all the cookies. For authorization, I send all cookies and also the authorization header if it's got one. And then I'm basically going to the backend application going, hey, run your authentication and then tell me what happens. And then if we get that back here, we can say, deserialize that principal into an actual claims principal, and then we can create an authentication ticket, and then that sets the user property on the HTTP context for the rest of this request to a claims principal that has all the same claims, roles, all that sort of stuff as it did on the back end. Now, one thing this won't handle at the moment is Windows authentication. It does not like serializing Windows identities because they're even worse than just normal claims identities. And there are two aspects to this. One is this is all going to be on an open source project, and if somebody really needs it, then they can submit it and go, if it's a Windows identity, then do it like this. Two is stop using Windows authentication. Seriously, just stop doing it. It doesn't work anymore. Things Windows authentication doesn't work properly with. Linux, for a start, Mac, that doesn't work there. We've got Kerberos, which is just people trying to disguise the fact that this is a proprietary authentication protocol by giving it an open name and blaming MIT. But more important than that, Windows authentication doesn't work with HTTP 2. It just doesn't. There's something about HTTP 2 that's they cannot make Windows authentication work over HTTP 2. And you want to be moving everything to HTTP 2. Actually, you want to be moving everything to HTTP 3 sometime this year, because that's already supported in some browsers and Cloudflare and other places. So yes, if you're using Windows authentication, stand up an Active Directory Federation server and start using it to get tokens, and then use those tokens to authenticate your web services and your gRPC services and everything else. That is the way to go. So yes, anyway, so I've authenticated people in my front-end application as well as in my back-end application. So if I go here and I log in, and I'm going to log it, no, go away, admin and $WORD. Don't blame me, that's the password it came with out of the Git repository. And we log in here, and you can see that over here we've got hello admin and log out. And we've switched to a different cart now because I'm logged in. I've got 3 items in my cart from the last time I logged in. So look, there we go. Shopping cart's not found though, so not everything is working beautifully. I need to fix that. But if I get that tilde out of there, then that works. And if I go to admin, I can get to the admin page because I am logged in, and this is under Wingtip Toys 2. If I go to admin, let me log in here and do admin and $WORD. I can have both of these at the same time because the cookies, some of the cookies are being set for 24019, and the cookies that are set for 5001 are completely separate cookies. So if I go into admin here, you can see this was the product admin page in this WebForms application, and it's really WebForms. You can tell that this was made by somebody who thought they were writing a Windows Forms application. And so to illustrate why sort of doing these things is a good idea, I've made a lovely, shiny, bootstrappy admin page. So this overrides this page here and adds all sorts of goodness into it. Does that do it? Yes, this does do something. And so I can add pages there, and I need a cancel button and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, but that admin page in my proxy application, let me just go to here and go to controllers and go to my admin controller, and you can see I do actually have the authorize attribute on there. So this is being authorized using the authentication that was done by the back end, using whatever the back end is. And so now we have authentication being handled as well. Now, I may have forgotten something, but I think that's pretty much it. And I can't think of anything else. If anyone can think of anything else, just shout me in the chat or hit me up on Twitter. Or what about data protection? Well, theoretically, data protection Because you're relying on the WebForms application and saying, you store this, you put this in session, you do all that side of things, it should just be transparent. So, because let's say the backend server is using SQL Server for session storage. And so it encrypts things that are going into SQL Server using its own data protection key. And so if I just went write another session provider for ASP.NET Core that talks to that same SQL Server thing, I would have to find some way to share keys between the front-end application and the back-end application. But most of the stuff that's in, because we're just going to the back-end, going, give me this value out of session, I don't think we have to worry about it. I think it's probably okay. Talk to me offline and explain why I'm wrong. You know you want to. We'll have beers. But yes, so I think this covers most of it. And the only other issue that I did run into was when the backend did a redirect. So if you tried to access a controlled page and it did a redirect to the login page, for some reason it used the fully qualified, so it used an absolute URL. And so you only find yourself browsing HTTP localhost 24019. And I could not figure out how to get the backend to stop doing that because it's buried somewhere in the depths of its login system. And so what I ended up having to do was write a custom wrapper around Microsoft's reverse proxy. It's not particularly custom, but this is, and the code to do this is on the Microsoft Reverse Proxy GitHub repo, so they know that you want to do it. But this does exactly the same stuff as map reverse proxy does, except it adds in a transformer, and a transformer is just something where when the proxy gets the response, before it sends it back out to the client, it goes, here's the response we got, do things with it, and then we can carry on. And so I just put this transformer in there to say, does the response have a location? If the location is an absolute URI and it starts with our destination prefix, which we've got from our proxy, then just turn it into a relative URI instead. And so that stopped that from happening. Now, all of this niceness, all of this hacking around and mapping things to bytes and sharing things between the new app and the old app, once I'd got it working and I'd figured out that it was actually viable and I thought it would be something that people could actually use, I wrapped it up into a NuGet, a couple of NuGet packages. And I actually asked people to help me name it on Twitter because I'm terrible at naming things. If I'd named it, it would be called Rendleizer, and that wouldn't work. And someone suggested Strangler, and I was kind of like, no, people don't want to use things that are called Strangler. I don't know, Martin. Talk to me afterwards. Shh. But I thought Cocoon. Cocoon is a nice thing that wraps itself around something that's usually quite fugly, actually. The things that go into cocoons tend not to be very pretty. I'm just saying. Nothing against caterpillars, but yeah. And then the things that come out of cocoons 6 months later, or however long that takes, beautiful flappy things that flit around the place and do lovely things. And also moths, which are just stupid and just fly at. What did moths fly at before light bulbs were invented? Inquiring minds need to know. So anyway, this is now what I'm doing on my Twitch stream, is I'm kind of writing Cocoon and building it and stuff. And I'm doing it, it's sort of related to what I've been doing with things like converting WCF to gRPC with the commercial product that I work on, which is Visual Recode. But Visual Recode is, it doesn't have any runtime stuff. It just changes your code. And so I didn't want to kind of mix the two things up. This is components, this is stuff that you're actually expecting to pick up and put into your application and put into your runtime. And so I wanted this to be open source. And so it is, and it's on GitHub under the Visual Recode organization at Cocoon. It's Apache 2.0, which is, I think, the right license for it. If someone tells me I'm wrong and it should be MIT, then they can talk to me. But it is open source, it's on there. Preview packages have started to go up onto NuGet, although honestly, I wouldn't start trying to use it just yet. I'm going to try and stand it up in front of a couple of gnarly WebForms applications that I've been working on and seeing if I can get it to work there. And at that point, I will sort of mark it as beta and say, if it works for this, it may very well work for whatever it is you're doing. So the other sort of question that comes up about this is I have established that you can replace WebForms with MVC views from an ASP.NET Core MVC application. I have checked, and it is also possible to do it with Razor pages. If you put Razor pages into your pipeline before the proxy, it will find those as well. And I asked today on Twitter whether you could mix Blazor into a normal ASP.NET application, or because I wasn't sure. I thought maybe Blazor was purely a single page, a SPA kind of thing, and once you're in Blazor, you stay in Blazor. But it turns out that you can make Blazor components and then just host them in regular Razor pages just using the component tag helper. And so if you wanted to rewrite your WebForms application into Blazor, then you could do that as well. And you can use Blazor server-side or Blazor WebAssembly. And so pretty much any pattern you could want to use. And obviously, you can also create MVC pages or Razor pages that use something like Svelte or Vue.js or React. And as long as it's not like a single page, a SPA, you should be okay. And once you've got it all migrated across, if you want to turn it into a SPA, then you can. But the docs for that, oh, where are they? Let me just grab them for you, because that's quite a long link. I'm going to put the link to the Blazor bit in the chat there. There you go. So yes, that is essentially all I had to show you. And I hope that it looks like something that people might go, oh, you know what, I could potentially see us doing that, because the first step of just creating the reverse proxy and spinning it up, and you can have your reverse proxy running on a Linux instance, or you can just run it in the same IIS that the WebForms application is running in. But yeah, that first step is essentially zero risk. You're just kind of going, I now have a reverse proxy in front of my application, and everything should just continue to work. And then you can just go, well, maybe I'll just redo the privacy page, or I'll just redo the amount. We've got these static pages. Maybe I'll just redo those, and just ease into it gradually. And then, you know, do the admin pages for your website, because people are more forgiving if something goes wrong in the admin pages and it's not customer facing, and gradually build up to the point where you're kind of going, yes, we can now replace the homepage with our new ASP.NET Core MVC Razor rendered view page, and do all that sort of thing. I will stick that in the Slack as well. Where is the Slack? I've lost the Slack. I know it's over here somewhere. Hello, Slack. There we go. What track are we? I don't know what track I'm in. Track 4. There we go. So yes, there's the link in the Slack as well. And once I'm done, I will also put all the links to all the things into the Slack for people to pick up from there. So in summary, the idea is to use Microsoft Reverse Proxy, stick it in front of a WebForms application, and intercept some of the page requests. To do this, you have to deal with session and authentication and a couple of other sort of issues that are specific to doing this. Oh, track 5. Let's put it in track 5 then. There we go. Yeah, that looks more like it with your Cookie Monster GIF. Well done. Track 4 is proxy of track 5 now. Nice. So yeah, to do this, I am creating Cocoon to handle things like session and authentication and all this sort of stuff. Also, you can follow me on Twitter, twitter.com, Mark Rendle, and you can come and watch me work on Cocoon and talk nonsense pretty much like I have for the last hour, but live and improvised and generally even more tired on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/markrendle. I will be around I'll stay in the track room for 10 minutes to answer questions if anybody has them, or you can ping me at Twitter and ask me on there as well. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. I really hope it was very helpful, and I really, really, really hope that I will see you in person at some time soon, maybe next year, or maybe before that. Take care of yourselves, and I will hopefully see you at the quiz tonight as well. Me and Dylan doing a quiz, 8 o'clock. Be there or don't. Cheers. Bye.